Okay, good morning, everyone. Hello, it looks like we have 30 participants in this room today. This is room C. The name of the session today from 10:15 to 11:45 is Seaweed Mariculture and Wild Harvest in Alaska, Status, Outlook, and Impacts. And we are really excited to welcome this session today and all of the participants. Joining us today, we have Melissa Good from Alaska Sea Grant Marine Advisory Program with the University of Alaska Fairbanks. We have a recording from Sky Stieritz from Noble Ocean Farms, Michelle Morris from Alaska Department of Fish and Game, the Division of Commercial Fisheries, Kate Fossman, registered dietitian with Vita Health, and I didn't see him yet, but hoping Dune Lankard is here with Native Conservancy. And then the person who put all this magic together, Evie Witten, thanks for being here. For my presenters, no Dune today. Okay, no worries. He's amazing. Y'all should check him out. And Native Conservancy. So Evie Witten is, Evie, I don't know if you want to pop on and say something. She's the magic maker who put all of this, this session together today. So again, this session is running from 10:15 to 11:45. And we'll go ahead and welcome Evie. I'll stop sharing.
Thanks, Rachel. Hi, I'm Evie Witten, and I'm AFPC board member, and I'm also currently the co-lead of a proof of concept project to establish a seaweed processing and marketing hub for Kachemak Bay. And my interest in seaweed comes from the intersection of a couple different streams, one in nature-based regenerative climate solutions, but also in our ability in Alaska to invest in local foods in a way that makes our communities more resilient. I was also really inspired by a session at the last AFPC conference, which featured Dune Lankard with the Native Conservancy, as well as Bren Smith with Greenwave. And that was a really popular and interesting session where they spoke about the development of a seaweed aquaculture industry broadly, and then also what the Native Conservancy is doing in Prince William Sound. So we pulled together this panel this year as in part to follow on that session and to expand on the breadth of what's happening around seaweed aquaculture in Alaska today. So we have a great lineup of panelists, and Rachel's already introduced everyone. So I'll just, with that, hand it over to Melissa Good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Evie, for putting this together and the introduction. Rachel, here, hold on 1 second, and I'll get my presentation up. All right, so I thought what I would do with my presentation is give a broad overview of what the seaweed mariculture industry looks like right now in Alaska, and a really high overview of things that we are working on at Alaska Sea Grant and some services that we provide. So who are we? Sea Grant is a national network of 34 university-based programs, including a National Sea Grant Library, National Sea Grant Law Center, and national offices located in DC. The Sea Grant mission is to enhance the practical use and conservation of coastal, marine, and Great Lakes resources in order to create a sustainable economy and environment. Alaska Sea Grant is a partnership between NOAA and the University of Alaska Fairbanks, so we are housed within the university. And we have marine advisory program agents and specialist agents across the state. In the bottom right hand of the screen, you can see a map of where we have personnel located. And so we're specifically talking about mariculture here. So mariculture is growing marine organisms in a marine environment. And this can include enhancement, restoration, and farming. Finfish farming is illegal in Alaska, so we kind of specifically say mariculture when we talk about aquaculture here in general. And what does the industry look like? In 2021, there was just over 536,000 pounds of seaweed sold. This is more than double 2020. And if you look at the graph on the right, you could see years on the x-axis and pounds in thousands of pounds on the y-axis. And what that shows is that the sale of seaweed is growing exponentially here in Alaska. In 2021, there were 11 permits issued for the commercial farming of seaweed, with 5 of those being active. You can have a permit for either seaweed or shellfish and seaweed combined. There were 17 issued permits and 14 of those were farming, though not necessarily selling seaweed. Most of those were selling shellfish, such as oysters. And there were 4 active nurseries, 2 of those being land-based and 2 of those actually being floating. And there's a lot of applicants. Right now, we are in the open application period, but last year, the Alaska Department of Fish and Game and Alaska Department of Natural Resources saw 18 applications for seaweed farms only, and 5 seaweed/shellfish farms. Here, I'm not reporting out applications for shellfish, so there was a number of those as well. And the total acres leased for seaweed and seaweed/shellfish farms is 870 acres, and that is the lease footprint, so not necessarily what an actual farm is taking up, which would be a smaller amount. And the total pending acreage with the applications that are in for review is 1,219. With farm sizes ranging between 1 and 200 acres, we're kind of the most common acreage amount for a farm is about 20 acres. This graph here came from the final report to the governor from the Alaska Mariculture Task Force. And what it shows is that the leases coming in or applications coming in, the lease acreage is increasing. So we're seeing a lot more applicants. We're seeing a lot more acreage that could potentially be farmed here in the future. And these are coming from all across Southern Alaska, all the way from the furthest end of Southeast out to the Aleutian Islands. We skipped, sorry. And the species that are currently being farmed actively in Alaska is ribbon kelp, Alaria marginata, sugar kelp, Saccharina latissima, or bull kelp, Nereocystis luciana. There is a small amount of sales of other red species that are naturally setting onto farm gear. And when we think about farm design, we're seeing small spreader bar systems, such as the picture and the schematic that you see here. I apologize, but my computer is acting funny. There, hopefully you could see that side. To these large tension-based systems. Here is a tension-based farm site in Kodiak, and this site is designed so that way you can add on 10-acre modules at a time. So rapidly growing a farm site, or the potential to at least. And right now, the seaweed is being farmed for food-based products. So the salsas and hot sauces we see coming out of Barnacle Foods. Blue Evolution has some dried products. They have some pureed products. The Kodiak Brewing Company has created kelp goza, and there's former Governor Bill Walker trying that kelp goza here in Kodiak. But there is a lot of interest in growing seaweed for other things, such as fertilizers, biostimulants, biofuels, and for other extractants for pharmaceuticals and nutraceuticals. So there's a lot of potential for other uses besides food products. And that report to the governor that I showed previously has a projection that the industry, the mariculture industry, so shellfish and seaweed combined, but it's expected to grow rapidly and continue to have growth. The Alaska Mariculture Development Plan that was published in 2018 set a goal to grow the industry to $100 million per year within 20 years. So 20 years being 2038, though there is projected growth even after that. And a big part of that growth is seaweed. And so what is Alaska Sea Grant doing to build capacity for the mariculture industry? And certainly nothing that we do is on our own. We work with partners from academia, government, industry, native tribal organizations. So we do have a lot of partners. The Alaska Mariculture Task Force sunset this past summer, and out of that came the Alaska Mariculture Alliance. And then Alaska Sea Grant was tasked with standing up the Alaska Mariculture Research and Training Center. Now, this is not a brick and mortar center. It's more of a coordinating entity. So that way we can help coordinate what research is going on across the state, what training opportunities are out there. So that way we're not being duplicative anywhere and we're helping the industry grow together. We have also been helping to establish pilot seaweed farms in Sand Point, Ketchikan, and Annette Island. And we also are working at a national scale and global scale as well. We are one of the lead Sea Grant programs that have established the National Seaweed Hub. We are also sit on the Safe Seaweed Coalition, which is a global coalition to help move the industry forward safely. So looking at safety all the way from occupational safety to creating safe products. We've also assisted with a lot of the publications that have come out recently, such as the one from PNNL on kelp energy products, and then two from the McKinley Research Center on Alaska seaweed market assessment and the assessment of seaweed processing locations in Alaska. And in 2021, December, we published the Seaweed Handling and Processing Guidelines for Alaska. And based upon those guidelines that were developed, we'll be holding a face-to-face seaweed handling and processing workshop here in Kodiak next month. We were also one of the lead organizations helping to stand up the Alaska Aquaculture Permitting Portal and Permitting Guide. There's a picture of that guide here. That guide is a PDF form or an interactive website, and we are actively keeping that up and going and up to date. We've also participated in some of the recent seaweed farm trainings and do have plans to host another face-to-face farm training here in Kodiak this coming fall, so fall 2021. The Exxon Valdez Oil Spill Trustee Council recently awarded over $32 million in funds for mariculture research in the Exxon Valdez oil spill area, so South Central, Prince William Sound through Kodiak and along onto the Alaska Peninsula. And we're going to be a major part in that once it gets set up. That again is a partnership between academia, regulatory agencies, industry, and other partners. And in addition to that, we're part of the Build Back Better proposal that was recently submitted to stand up the mariculture, the Alaska Mariculture Cluster. So there are a lot of efforts going on right now to support this industry. In addition to that, as this industry is growing, we're actively working with a lot of partners to build business and economic planning tools, both for seaweed and shellfish, and direct marketing tools as well. And not only are we creating products, but I would say us, like as people, our resources, we do one-on-one consultations and are happy to work with individuals. Chris Sanito is our seafood technology specialist. He's really been one of the key players in developing processing capabilities here in Alaska, specifically here in Kodiak. Quentin Fong is our seafood marketing specialist, and then myself. We have a broader team, but we specifically work on mariculture. And we do this out of the Kodiak Seafood and Marine Science Center, which is a state-of-the-art pilot processing plant where we have a wide array of processing equipment a kitchen, walk-in freezers and coolers, and food safety laboratory capacity. And since I had 10 minutes, I'm going to call it there.
Great. Thank you so much, Melissa. Great to have that overview and hear about the wide variety of things Sea Grant is involved with. Next, I'm going to pass it over to Lindsay Olson, who is the Alaska lead for Greenwave and is also their farmer training program manager. Lindsay's based in Homer and is also a kelp farmer herself. Over to you, Lindsay.
Awesome. Thanks, Evie. Nice to be here today with everyone, and fun to hear Missy's presentation and the update from Sea Grant. As Evie mentioned, yeah, my name is Lindsay Olson. I live in Homer on Supiaq and Dena'ina land, and I run the farmer training program at Greenwave. And today I'm going to talk about some of the work that Greenwave has been involved in Alaska over the last couple of years, much in partnership with Sea Grant and other partners in the state to train and support seaweed farmers, and then share some updates on programs that we have coming down the pipeline very soon. Oops. So Greenwave is a bi-coastal organization based in New Haven, Connecticut on the East Coast, where we run a commercial kelp farm and kelp hatchery that supplies farms in southern New England. The organization was founded in 2015, but has been growing quickly, and we now have staff and board members on the West Coast in California, up in Alaska, and throughout the last several years have been working to really try and help the industry scale on this coast in Alaska and the Pacific Northwest, including parts of British Columbia. And our work really focuses on training and supporting regenerative ocean farmers, in particular kelp farmers. And we do this through a mix of sort of broad trainings on starting and running a farm or a kelp hatchery, topical Q&A sessions for active kelp farmers on specific issues they might be encountering, and then direct support through consultation and connections to buyers. And a wing of our programming is also dedicated exclusively to market innovation, so working to try and reduce some of the blockages and bringing the seaweed market to scale in the US. We do some research on potential new sales channels for kelp, product development, quality handling, storage, and then share all that out through our network of farmers. So in 2019, we began our first partnership conversations with different groups here in Alaska, and that work has grown swiftly. So over the last 2 years, we've participated or partnered in hosting 7 different trainings and workshops for Alaskans interested in farming kelp. And those have all been put together in close collaboration with some really wonderful partners based here in Alaska, and we couldn't have done it without their support of all these groups working on the ground. So thanks to everyone, and many of you guys are here today, so it's nice to see you. So the first trainings that we helped host were in February of 2020. Missy just mentioned this, but there was a series of seaweed farm startup trainings. They reached about 75 people total, and they were held on site in Sitka, Ketchikan, and Kodiak, and really helped folks kind of go through the process of permitting, site evaluation, farm design, and then what would it look like to operationalize a seaweed farm. Those trainings were really popular, so we held them again in 2021. But due to the pandemic, they moved online. And so we had 127 people participate in a 3-day intensive workshop where we went through that whole progression of the idea of starting a farm through actually getting your gear in the water. In March of last year, we worked with 30 Alaska Native folks from over 10 different communities in Southeast Alaska in partnership with Spruce Root and the Sustainable Southeast Partnership to hold a training that was specifically focused on the traditional use of seaweed as a traditional food and also commercial farming opportunities for Alaska Native communities. And then over the last couple of years, we've been working really closely with our partners at the Native Conservancy and Alutiiq Pride Marine Institute in Cordova and Seward, respectively, to help sort of start up and scale kelp hatcheries in their different facilities. So kind of helped with trainings on source collection and ID, getting those hatcheries operational, and they have both been really successful and have grown substantially over the last 2 years. So in sum, all those trainings have reached about 400 people in Alaska in the last 2 years. That's kind of a short summary of what we've done to date, but I want to spend the rest of my time just talking about some exciting new programming that we have coming up on the horizon that I think will directly benefit Alaskan seaweed farmers and anyone who's interested in joining the industry here. So in a couple of short weeks, on April 19th, we're going to be launching the Greenwave Ocean Farming Hub, which is an all-inclusive resource designed for folks who are interested in starting and running a kelp farm or a kelp hatchery. And this resource is really kind of built to bring all of the content that we've offered over these various trainings that I just described over the past couple of years into one central place. And the goal is just to reach anyone and everyone who is interested in starting a kelp farm, to give them the resources they need, to guide them through that process, and to really start to scale the industry as a whole. So within this online tool, there are three main components. The first is a series of courses. There will be about 30 courses in total, more on the farming side than on the hatchery side, but content for both curriculums. And it'll be a mix of sort of written narrative, collection of how-to videos, including like, how do you process your source tissue once you've collected it from the wild and are looking to, to release spores and for your spools, or how do you insert your 5-line array into the water column, et cetera. We've got downloadable tools and resources for both farmers and hatchery technicians. And the courses, again, kind of start from the very beginning of, all right, you're interested in this industry, where do you go first? And then lead you sort of step by step, reference and pay homage to a lot of the work that partners in Alaska have been doing. So the Alaska Permitting Portal is a hugely helpful resource for farmers here. The hub is designed for North American farmers on both coasts. So there are resources for all of the coastal US states, and we also have state-specific resources directly for Alaskans. So that's what the courses will entail, but we've kind of learned through the years that when farmers are just starting out, some of these concepts are really tricky to wrap your head around, especially the combination of factors of, people might say, okay, I know I want to start a farm, and I know that I need to grow like a certain amount of kelp in order to make money doing this, but how big a farm do I need in order to grow that much kelp, and how much site area do I need to permit in order to meet those goals? And so to kind of help people wrap their heads around all of these different factors, we built out this interactive tool. It's called the Farm Design Tool, and it really is designed to help farmers design a farm for a specific site. So you can use this tool to input data about your site, such as the depth, the bottom type, the current speed. If you know the type of gear you want to use, you can put that in. And then there is a modeling software that will essentially build you a farm diagram of what the farm would look like to match the specifications that you outlined. It'll give you anchor recommendations on how big an anchor you might need. It'll tell you how large a site you need to permit in order to deploy that farm. And it'll also give you some startup costs and a basic gear list and a price tag to what it would cost to put that farm in the water. So it's a pretty exciting tool, and really excited to be able to share it soon. And then the last component of this hub is an online community. And this I'm pretty excited about. I think that it'll be a really neat way to connect farmers in Alaska. Right now, we've sort of noticed that there's no central place for folks who are working in this industry to come together and get their questions answered or talk shop. There's, folks are talking to each other, farmers are connecting one-on-one, but we wanted to create a space where people could really share resources, exchange ideas, and help propel the whole industry via these conversations. And I think it could be a really valuable tool for farmers in remote parts of Alaska that don't necessarily have a strong network of farms the way that some kelp farmers on the East Coast do. In Maine and Southern New England, there are established communities that have many farms in one town, and that isn't necessarily the case here. So I'm really excited about this tool and its opportunity to create that space for connection. And then lastly, we have two other projects that are kind of tied in with this hub launch that are directly supporting active kelp farmers here in Alaska. So this is the Seaweed Source, which is essentially an online directory of kelp farms where farmers can list their businesses and the crops that they grow. And then buyers can apply to connect with the farmers. And Greenwave basically just does a quick vetting of the buyer to make sure they're serious and they wouldn't waste the farmer's time. And then they can reach out directly to the farmer and collaborate on sales. And so this was a pilot project that we got funding for to do on the East Coast, but in the spring, it is expanding to include several farms in Alaska. And anyone who's actively farming kelp can list their farm here. And then the last is the Kelp Climate Fund, which is an initiative that pays farmers directly for the climate benefits and the positive environmental externalities of their crops. And the way that it works is farmers sign up, they communicate how much seed they're outplanting, and they provide monitoring data throughout the season on how their kelp is growing. And then they're paid a per pound subsidy for the final weights of their kelp at the time of harvest. So we launched it this year as a pilot. We're working with 5 farmers across the country, including one in Alaska. And next year, this program will be open to any farmer in the US who's growing more than 5,000 pounds of kelp. And we expect to bring on several more Alaskan kelp farmers next fall. So these are some examples of the programs that could support the industry directly right now. So with that, I'll just wrap it up and leave you with the web address where you can sign up for the hub launch if you're interested in checking out this tool. I would love if you would all sign up and tell your friends and your networks. I think as Missy alluded, there's just so much potential here in Alaska for this industry. And I hope that this can be one more resource in an already very robust tool belt of tools that have been built in Alaska to support farmers who are interested in joining the industry. So please check it out. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Lindsay. So much happening in a short amount of time. It's really, really encouraging and fun to see. Our next speaker is not with us live today. It's Sky Steritz, and she's co-owner of Noble Ocean Farms out of Cordova, and she is traveling today. So we're going to have a recorded session, and bear with me for 1 second while I get that up and loaded. And I will share my screen. Rachel, are you, wait.
Yes.
I think we weren't getting sound.
Oh, Cirrus is no sound either. Okay, that's weird. We'll try and share one more time.
All the best laid plans for our technology.
We had so many backups.
I know. Here, I can try to bring it up again and see if I can get it going.
Okay, how about?
And that's why I'm descendant and I live on EAC land in Cordova, Alaska.
Is that working?
Yes.
Okay, then I'm going to hit play again and we will get back to listening to Sky.
I'm also a first-year kelp farmer, and that's why I am here to speak with you today. My partner, Sean, and I started a small business together called Noble Ocean Farms. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and share a bit of what we've learned in some of our experiences. Okay. So I was first invited to this region in Cordova, South Central Alaska, by Dune Lankard and Carol Hoover. And I came to work for them with the EAC Preservation Council. That was in 2019. And basically right after I arrived, I met this guy, Sean, who I fell in love with, and he was also friends with Dune. And Dune started talking to us both about kelp farming. And we were immediately intrigued because we were both raised with a deep love and respect for the ocean, spending a lot of time on the water. And so we did our research. We learned more about what kelp farming entails and what the potential impacts are. And by doing that research, we learned that kelp farming can directly improve food security it can enhance habitat for marine animals, and it can counter local ocean acidification because the kelp is sequestering so much carbon and outputting large amounts of oxygen. So it creates these oxygen-rich pockets in the bays where it's grown. So we decided to go through with the permitting process, and here we are today. I am now a 28-year-old ocean farmer and entrepreneur in this budding regenerative mariculture industry. Noble Ocean Farms was born from a place of love for the people in our lives and for the ocean that sustains us. So we are doing this because we want to give back. And one of the reasons why we're so motivated to grow kelp is because, as many of you know, in rural coastal Alaska or any part of rural Alaska, it's very hard for most families to access sufficient produce to get the nutrients they need from fresh vegetables and greens. And in kelp, we find this magnificent sea green that people have been using kelp for a very long time and have recognized its benefits to the human body and integrated it into cuisine. And some of the benefits of kelp are that it strengthens our immune system, it purifies our arteries, it is an anti-inflammatory, so it's extremely beneficial for people who have arthritis. I also know a woman I work with at the local elementary school here who is going through menopause, and her doctor actually prescribed her to take kelp supplements for that. For all of us, kelp can remineralize our bodies. So many of us are deficient in minerals that we need, such as iodine, calcium, potassium, magnesium, and kelp is one of the greatest sources of these minerals that can help enhance our bodily function on a daily basis. And that is really motivating for us, especially during a health crisis where we all need the immune boosting benefits of foods like kelp. So what is it actually like to be a kelp farmer in Alaska? I won't sugarcoat it. I know that kelp farming gets romanticized, overly so, in the media many times, and it is truly very challenging. While it's fun, it's also intense, and it is not cheap. I do want to share that the estimates that were publicly available to us when we started this journey about what it may cost to become a kelp farmer were about 3 times lower than what we have already spent to get into this and to start our business and to launch our kelp farm. So definitely very costly and time consuming. Right now it's full on. In addition to our day jobs, we are putting in about 30 hours a week into kelp farming and figuring out all the different components of this nascent industry and how to navigate them. I would say that kelp farming is also an engineering challenge because you are trying to figure out how to keep this structure of ropes, which we call lines, anchors, and buoys, and some connector devices like snaps, stainless steel snaps, and these stainless steel rings that you see in the photo. How to keep it all well tensioned underwater during pretty significant tidal changes that we see in Alaska. So that's the first challenge, building the actual array, as we call it, or some people call it a rig, but it's our farm. It's the underwater farm design. And to actually build this was a lot more labor intensive than we anticipated this past fall. So we spent a lot of long nights at our friend's warehouse here, which you see in the photo. And this is a basic schematic of what a kelp farm looks like. So you have the long lines, which are the grow lines that you seed the kelp onto, and then the kelp is growing downwards, and you drop the anchors, which is a nerve-wracking part of the process. You have to hope that the anchors drop into the exact right place where you want them on the ocean floor. So it's definitely a challenge. We outplanted our kelp on October 22nd of 2021. So we outplanted over 4,000 feet of seeded line that day. And our goal is to keep as much of the kelp within the state as possible, because we really want to nourish Alaskans. That doesn't mean that we can't send it to Washington, Oregon, California, if there is a values aligned company or buyer there as well. But we really want to focus on food security in Alaska, as we know it's a real challenge for folks. So this is what our next several months are going to consist of. And then this summer, we will also be collecting the wild fertile sorus of kelp blades within 50 kilometers of our farm site in Prince William Sound. And that's an exciting process that we've been able to watch some webinars and learn about how to do that. But that's another piece of it that requires a lot of time and energy, going out and collecting the wild fertile sorus and then sending it to a nursery or hatchery like the Alutiiq Pride Marine Institute over in Seward, to then grow in their aquarium systems so that we will be ready to outplant again this fall. And we do plan on adding more lines, probably doubling our farm every year, because right now we're only using about 1/10 of our permitted site. So we're permitted for 22 acres in the western arm of Simpson Bay, but we've only used probably about 2 acres of that farm with our 18 grow lines that are in the water currently. So that's basically our game plan. There's certainly a lot to figure out in this nascent industry in Alaska, and I don't believe that anyone can do it alone. I'm really grateful that there is a grassroots movement here in Alaska to support mariculture, and there's a lot of brilliant scientists. The folks at state agencies have been super helpful to supporting us and helping us get the answers that we need. But it really feels like we're all figuring it out together at this stage, and it's all hands on deck. We're doing a lot of research every day to look into these different aspects of seaweed farming, from, like I said, the sorus collection, that wild fertile tissue in the kelp blades, learning about their reproductive cycles, to learning about processing and handling and what are the best practices for that when it comes to seaweed. There's a lot to learn, and I can honestly say that in the past couple of years of launching this business and getting our kelp farm in the water, that it has required more focus and effort from me than my master's thesis did. So it's genuinely a ton of work, and we are still facing challenges. Like we have ice flows that come through that bay. Many people face that in Mariculture. Through all of those challenges is the collective benefits that we know to be true with kelp farming. And we're really excited to feed our communities, to feed all of you with fresh kelp here really soon. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you to the Alaska Food Policy Council for uplifting sea greens in the public sphere. Again, it's a team effort to educating and helping people become more aware of kelp being grown in Alaska and how it all works. And if you happen to have any more questions or interest in either kelp farming or how you can access our kelp, please reach out. Please send me a message. Here's my email address. It's just skye, S-K-Y-E, @nobleoceanfarms.com. Really happy to talk about kelp anytime. I hope you all enjoy the rest of this festival, and thanks again for tuning in.
Great. Thank you, Rachel, for getting that up and running. It was really good to hear from Skye. I'm glad we were able to follow through with it. Next up, we have Michelle Morris from ADF&G. She's the aquaculture permit coordinator. So she knows a lot about aquaculture in Alaska, but today she's actually going to speak with us about wild harvest of seaweeds. Over to you, Michelle. Thank you.
Okay. Let's see. All right. Yeah, thanks for the introduction. My name is Michelle Morris, and I am the permit coordinator for Alaska Department of Fish and Game for the aquaculture section. So I handle the permitting for aquatic farms for fish and game. But today, we're going to be talking about the fish and game guidelines for wild stock aquatic plant harvest. When considering collection for wild stock aquatic plants in Alaska, there's a few questions you need to ask yourself. One, what is the purpose of your collection? Are you collecting for gardening or for compost? Are you making food products or something for personal consumption? And then are you planning on making products for sale? Where are you located? This will determine whether or not you fall within the subsistence areas or the non-subsistence areas in Alaska. And then what type of plants are you targeting? Are you looking for attached plants, harvesting fresh plants, or are you looking for the free floating or miscellaneous hodgepodge on the shoreline called beach rack? Depending on the purpose of your collection, you may need a permit. For non-commercial collections, including gardening, food, or for medicinal or beauty products, collections of aquatic plants are authorized through subsistence or personal use regulations. For commercial collections, including small-scale farmers markets or larger businesses, a commissioner's permit is required. Commissioner's permits are issued at each fish and game area office. The species, volume, and authorized collection locations and term length can vary. The regulations for collection for non-commercial use of aquatic plants depends on where you are located in the state. There are 5 areas identified by Board of Fish as non-subsistence areas. These are defined as areas where subsistence is not the principal characteristic of the economy, culture, or way of life. These are Fairbanks, Anchorage, Valdez, Juneau, and Ketchikan. In all other areas, harvest is considered subsistence, and there's no seasonal restrictions or bag limits for collection, with the exception of that very small portion in Cook Inlet, which is right outside the Anchorage Matsu-Kenai subsistence area. And in this small area, the daily harvest and possession limit is 10 gallons. In the identified non-subsistence areas, aquatic plants may be harvested for personal use. 3 of these locations have personal use regulations. A sport fish license is required for personal use collections. In Southeast, Ketchikan and Juneau have defined bag limits and locations where harvest is prohibited. In Ketchikan, along the shoreline, on the road system, there's a 10-gallon bag limit. This does not apply to any of that free-floating or aquatic plants above the tide line. In Juneau, the shores along the road system are closed, except for the free-floating or aquatic plants, and if you are off the road system, the limit is 10 gallons. In the Anchorage Matsu-Kenai area, personal use harvest of all aquatic plants is closed from May 1st to August 30th. And then during the rest of the year, you are only allowed to collect that free-floating or beach rack above the high tide line, and that harvest limit is 10 gallons. There are a variety of marine aquatic plants that are present in Alaska. While aquatic plants, seaweed, algae, and kelp are often used interchangeably, have to remember that not all aquatic plants are seaweed and not all seaweeds are kelp. Depending on what type you want to collect, there may be different limitations. These are listed in the subsistence or personal use regulations, or may be defined in your commissioner's permit if you're collecting for commercial purposes. Macrocystis, or giant kelp, is the only species that has specific harvesting requirements defined in regulation. This applies to both subsistence and personal use collections. The plant must be harvested in a manner that prevents it from being dislodged or from the bottom or causes it to break. Only the upper portion may be retained, and it cannot be cut more than 1 foot below the surface of the water. Use of diving gear is prohibited for harvest, and harvest is closed in areas where herring are spawning. So that's just a brief overview there of the aquatic plant collection for wild collections. But if you got any questions, you can contact your local ADF&G area office, or you can reach out to me. Or if you have aquatic farming questions, you can also contact me.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle. I think really helpful to have that perspective of the wild harvest, as well as the emergence of a kelp and seaweed aquaculture in the state. Next up, we have Kate Fossman. And Kate is a registered dietitian and comes to us from Haines today. I'll pass it right over to you, Kate.
Hello. All right, let me see if I can get my screen shared here. Okay, sorry, just just a minute. I'm working on getting it full screen. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay, we're just gonna go with this. So, all right. So I'm gonna be chatting about the nutritional benefits of kelp and seaweed today. First, a little bit of background and disclosures. So I'm from Haines. I'm currently in Haley, Idaho, visiting family, which means I'm currently on Shoshone-Bannock lands. I'm a co-lead for the Klukwan Community Garden. I'm currently a virtual dietitian and diabetes educator with Vita Health, but you might know me previously with the Southeast Alaska Regional Health Consortium. And I'm actually heading over to a new telehealth company here soon called Perry Health. I'm a content partner with NCES and SoFire Health nutrition education companies. And my in-laws are in commercial salmon fishing, but otherwise I have no industry connections to disclose. So first, we're going to start off with a poll. So for this, I'm using this app called Slido. So what you can do if you want to play along is join us on slido.com. So you can use this like on your phone, just like type in slido.com. And then enter in this number 028232. And then go ahead and vote on how often you eat kelp or seaweed. Yeah. We're going to have a few more questions from Slido in the presentation today. So this one's kind of like a little warm up for us just to see kind of where we're at with how often we're enjoying this wonderful food. And I just want to give a little shout out to the photo credit. The photo credit here is from Edible Alaska article about black seaweed from 2016. Okay, so we're gonna wrap that up. It sounds like a lot of folks have it in their pantry. They have it from time to time. A lot of us enjoy it with sushi, and some of us are enjoying it most days or every day. We don't have anyone yet that hasn't tried it yet, so that's kind of fun. Everyone's had a taste of some kelp or seaweed yet. So first I wanted to touch on just some general traditional and local food benefits. This is something that's really near and dear to me. And so I wanna just bring up this little thought question. First, to think back on your favorite local food experience. These are some pictures featuring my favorite local food experiences. And this is just because there's so much more than the nutrients that we get from food. Think about who was there at your local food experience. What did you eat? Where did it come from? How did it feel to eat that local food? How did it make your system feel? And was it a new food to you, or was it something you remember from childhood and that kind of brought some good memories for you? So just to kind of tie that in. And onto some kind of more sciencey things about the benefits of local foods. We've got kind of three main attributes here. We've got our nutrient density, and nutrient density and quality both have to do with less transit time. So when we eat something that was grown closer to home, it didn't have to travel so far, and therefore more of the nutrients are still present. And then we've got nutrient variety. So when we increase the variety of our diet, we also increase the diet diversity. And so that helps with our micronutrient variety and better nutritional coverage. So this is going to come into play kind of a little later on in the presentation too. All right, so if you still got Slido open, we're going to do another question. So this is a word cloud. So this is where you free text in what's your favorite way to eat or prepare seaweed. Here we have a picture featuring miso soup, which is how I most recently enjoyed seaweed myself. Oh yeah, miso soup. Okay, someone else enjoys that too. Ooh, seaweed salad. Okay, we might have to have a recipe share at some point. Oh yeah, sauteed with onions. Definitely sushi. Yep. Okay. Yes, dried black seaweed. That one's really nice to me too. Sauteed with onions, I'm gonna have to try that. Crumbled on rice, that would be some really good flavor. Yeah, hot sauce, ooh. Seaweed fondue. I need to try seaweed fondue. I like everything fondue. Okay. Oh yeah. All right. So go ahead. You can keep entering your ideas in there in the Slido, and we'll see what we can come up with to publish here at the end for some more ideas. Yeah, these are amazing. Okay. So on to some specific nutrients regarding kelp and seaweed. So as Skye mentioned in her recorded presentation, there are a lot of nutritional benefits to kelp and seaweed. I wanted to focus on a handful of them, just time limitations, you can only go into so much. So the things that I'm going to focus on today are prebiotics, gland health, and bone and blood health. So going right along to prebiotics. So what prebiotics are is they're a specific chain length of carbohydrates. Our bodies can't digest them, but our gut bacteria can. And so I jokingly call this feeding our pets. If we don't consume prebiotics, our gut bacteria don't flourish, and they don't give us these really important byproducts of their metabolism. So specifically, when I was looking at research regarding the prebiotics of seaweed and the health benefits, I came across some research that was looking at the trying to understand why certain populations that consume a lot of seaweed were having lower incidence of colorectal cancers. We were able to see this in population level studies. And so they wanted to see, what specifically is it about the seaweed that is resulting in these better outcomes. So there was this one piece of research by Yoon et al. In 2021, and they isolated the compounds from red ribbon seaweed, which were anti-cancer. So this is a little graphic from that scientific paper, and it specifically makes the prebiotics from the red ribbon seaweed support the bifidobacterium that are beneficial for prevention of colon cancer. All right, so going on to gland health, we're going to focus on two nutrients today, iodine and magnesium. Iodine associated with thyroid health, and magnesium, I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about pancreas health for healthy glucose metabolism. So a lot of people know about the connection between iodine and thyroid. We're going to go into a little bit about how much iodine is in certain seaweeds. And just a little disclaimer that if you do have a thyroid disorder, like hypothyroidism, hyperthyroidism, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, you might just want to run certain high iodine foods by your doctor to know how to most safely incorporate them. Just as, you know, the healthcare person in me has to say that. So, but iodine is known to be helpful with energy, brain function, and prevention of more significant thyroid disease like goiter. But for magnesium, as a certified diabetes educator, this one is very important to me because about half of Americans are actually magnesium deficient. Magnesium is crucial in the role of glucose metabolism because it helps the pancreas actually release insulin. Insulin helps the glucose get into our cells, and with inadequate magnesium, we do see it's more challenging to control our blood glucose levels. It's also, you know, helpful for our cells to actually use that insulin once it's released as well. So going on to bone and blood health, we know that there's great vitamin K in kelps and seaweeds, and this helps with the quality of bone health. So not just putting down that calcium and phosphorus, but also improving the quality of the matrix that it creates. And then the iron present in the kelps and seaweeds, the iron is kind of that middle crucial component of hemoglobin molecule that helps carry the oxygen around in our blood. So you might have heard of iron deficiency anemia. That's kind of the connection here. All right, and so now this table, this is a generalized table of information. So you can see that, you know, there's obviously more than one kind of kelp, more than one kind of red seaweed, and more than one kind of black seaweed. And the nutrients do change based on the time of year that they're harvested and from, you know, the different geographic locations that it's harvested. So this is not a one size fits all table. I just wanted to bring this up as a way to show the variety of nutrients present in a variety of different seaweeds. So clearly there's a ton of iodine in 10 grams of raw seaweed or raw kelp. And we look at other superstars, like there's quite a bit of vitamin K present in dried black seaweed, and then a good amount of folate also in the dried black seaweed. I included folate for the general nervous system and cardiovascular health, stroke prevention, prevention of neural tube defects, those important things. And just to tie it all together, let's see, I wanted to just do one last word cloud on Slido. So this is kind of just, you know, tying it all together. What's important to you about incorporating seaweed into your diet? We talked about a few different main benefits from, you know, kind of the psychosocial aspects of eating local foods to the real nitty-gritty of the nutrient components of incorporating seaweed. And then of course there's the flavor component as well. So yeah, just kind of like when you think about seaweed and kelp, what it might be important to you about increasing your intake, going maybe from just in the sushi to keeping it in the pantry to something you might enjoy daily in balance. With the umami, definitely high nutrition, eating local foods, environmental health, supporting the environment. All right. So I want to leave enough time for our panel. So I'm gonna go right ahead and end this presentation, just including on some resources, some sources from today. And all right, thank you all very much.
That was great, Kate. Thank you so much. And I think a great way to kind of help tie it all together from what's happening in Alaska to hearing from people who are starting farms, and then to, some of the reasons why we as consumers might really want to engage as people who are buying and enjoying the kelp. I want to open it up now to questions and discussion, and I can start by looking at some of the questions that people have posed in the chat, but I guess I'd really just encourage people to raise your hand and jump in. One of the questions that Kaylee Eiler asked early on is any fertilizer being produced in the state with kelp? And Michelle, you might be the best one to answer that, but I think it's the fishy peat. Is that the only one that's being produced currently?
I don't know the name of the business. I do know that there's a guy in South Central Alaska who gets commissioner's permits for harvest of natural set wild kelp, the beach rock type of stuff, that he makes a fertilizer, and he's been doing it for a couple decades, I believe. As far as any of the aquatic farms, I don't know what the products are. They just report to me how much they sell. They don't tell me what it's made into.
Okay, great. Yeah, I believe the wild harvest one is fishy peat, which is produced down on the Kenai. Yeah.
Hi, I was wondering more about just the daily business of being a kelp farmer, what Sky was talking about, but just more once you've got everything set up, how often do you check the racks, and just what does it look like?
Yeah, great question. She raised some interesting points about how it's a lot of hard work. Lindsay, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, sure. I can answer. So in addition to my role at Green Wave, my family also has a small mariculture farm in Kachemak Bay, and we're farming some kelp this year. And it's our first year farming kelp, so I have more experience with oysters. But as Sky mentioned, it's a lot of work to get started. I think that the farm installation, the design process, and then getting your system in the water does require quite a bit of initial effort. Once it's in the water, I would say, at Green Wave, our recommendation is that you check on your farm every 1 to 2 weeks, weather permitting, through the growing season, and just do a visual drive-by. Make sure that the lines are kind of how they're tensioned the way that you want them to be. And then you'll be monitoring a lot more frequently come time to harvest, just to make sure that your kelp is still staying high quality. There's not biofouling starting to show up, and kind of communicating with the person or people you're planning to sell to, how the kelp is growing. So I would say there's some bursts of activity on either on the bookend the season, and then periodic visits during the winter.
Yeah, and I'll just say it kind of depends on your site too. And so if you have any sort of extreme weather events or times when you're going to get a lot of drift coming through the area, you're going to want to check on your site. And Lindsay really kind of nailed something at the end. There's whoever's buying your kelp is going to have a lot of say on what it should look like. They're going to have their own requirements. So when you start thinking about starting a kelp farming business, you're going to want to have buyers lined up, at least being on that path to getting those lined up before you start spending your money and getting, really invested into it.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Eliza has her hand up. You want to go ahead, Eliza?
Sure. My question had to do with drying. So I know that for harvesting the wild stuff, drying is the really big deal. It's the most work. And I'm wondering how you guys dry and what the process of harvest looks like.
Well, I'll actually take a little step at that, stab at that question, just because it's a project I'm working on right now. With the full disclosure that I've done a lot of drying from personal use harvest, but we're just starting to this season experiment with different ways to do it on a larger scale for harvest from aquaculture farms. I think one of the simple ways that people are, or simpler ways that people are doing it around the country are in high tunnels. Well, first of all, you can just hang it out on a clothesline in the sun is what some people do. But if you're wanting to do it for food use, and especially for any kind of commercial use, it needs to be under some sort of protected cover. I'll also say that for food use, the regulations are not very well defined, and I'm going to defer to Missy and to Michelle on that to some degree, or maybe there are others who are in the session here who can speak to it from the state's perspective. But right now we don't have national guidance on food safe ways to preserve seaweed, to dehydrate, or other methods. So every state is working on their own and communicating through great organizations like Sea Grant, and so it's an area that's still in development. But the racks, just to answer your question, kind of hanging, what a lot of people are doing in different parts of the country is for simple drying, is hanging on lines or ropes in a hoop house.
Is that what people are doing commercially as well? That's my question.
Well, there's not a lot of commercial dehydrate or commercial preservation happening in Alaska yet. This is all just beginning. And people are using, I know Sky and her partner are investing in a commercial dehydrator to dry their seaweed. Certainly around the world, people are using commercial dehydrators at different scales as well. That is it is an expensive option for a small farmer. So I think that, one of the things that many of us are trying to do right now is look at that question in particular and try to figure out, how do you do this in a way that's energy efficient and cost effective, and also in terms of workflow makes sense for the farmers and people working on processing end of it.
Yeah, cool. Thank you so much. I'm really curious to see what people figure out. It's a lot of work to hang seaweed, and you need a roof over it if you're going to hope to get a good crop.
Yeah, well, and Missy has pasted here in the chat, and I'm sorry, I should have led with that one, Missy, that Sea Grant has a publication out on how to preserve seaweeds. And so I don't mean to at all imply that we don't know how to do it. Sea Grant has been doing a great job with it. It's just trying to explain that we don't have standard regulations across the states. And then I know that the Alaska DEC is still figuring out, especially for dehydration, exactly what the regulations are going to be.
And there are standards for shelf-safe products. You do need to have it down to a certain water activity level. And when it comes to drying at a commercial scale, some companies on the East Coast, such as like the Crop Project, are taking shipping containers, and they're revamping their shipping containers to be drying units. So they're able to do it at a little bit of a larger scale. Certainly there are those energy inputs there. What we do here at the Kodiak Seafood and Marine Science Center is we use an industrial scale smoker. You don't have to add wood chips. So we use that as a drying unit, and we're able to do, okay sized batches, certainly nothing that you would do at a very large scale. But we were working on some product development with dried seaweed using that. And then there also, if you take a look at that guide, there is a technology list. It's one of the appendices that you can click on, and it does have some equipment. It's like links to different types of equipment at different scales that you're thinking about, from like hundreds to tens of thousands of pounds. Of course, drying can get very expensive. But for anybody that's trying to develop their own dried products, we do have a food safety lab. And if you send us stuff, our technology specialists can analyze your products, make sure they're at the proper water activity level. And you can buy that equipment too. That's also in the guide, links to where you can buy your own equipment to test for water activity.
Great, thank you, Missy. Next we have Drake and then Sarah Lewis. Drake, you want to go ahead and?
Yeah, the team and I here over at EV's Brinery, we're trying to experiment with kelp, but we don't have a strong idea of what kelp looks like when it's fermenting. And I was wondering if anyone had an idea of how that looks.
Well, I'll say, Drake, that that I've experimented with it and it ferments well. I'd be happy to talk with you about that some more. I also, Missy, I might ask you again. I know that there's some funding recently awarded that's going into a larger scale question of looking at fermentation on a larger scale. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the Kodiak Economic Development Corporation recently got some Denali Commission fundings to look at large scale fermentation, but this is more geared towards not necessarily food products, more like fertilizer type products. But then also, I was gonna say, like in food product fermentation, it can ferment. Again, there's you're gonna wanna have a food safe product, and so you're gonna wanna test for the salt phase, the level of salt that's in there, you know, and make sure it's at a right pH. This is also, your product is not degrading. And one thing that you can do is, you know, write down your recipe, what you're doing, your processes, and then send them over to Chris Sanito, and he can review that. And then you could also send in your product and we can test it for, you know, that it's at the proper pH and the proper, salt level for shelf stable products.
Yeah, again, thank you, Missy. And yeah, I would say, Drake, the biggest thing you need to do and think about in adjusting recipes is for the salt content, as Missy said.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Sarah?
Hi, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Awesome. So I'm actually a cooperative extension agent in Juneau, and I joined this not as a content expert because this is super interesting to me, but a couple of things that have come up. So I'm a member of the produce safety team for the state, and so though there's lots of different products in Alaska that might not be specifically mentioned in produce safety, anytime there's going to be one that may be eaten without a kill step, it's a really good idea to know about the produce safety processes, you know, for food safety issues. Also, cottage foods, a lot of the products that can be made with seafood, with seaweed and kelp will qualify for cottage foods exemption rather than having to go all the way towards a food establishment permit. You can kind of do some incubating as a cottage food producer, which is pretty exciting. And I know that all the folks who are on this panel know about that, and so you can contact them about that as well. There's just some really great directions you can go with seaweed and kelp. Thanks so much for this presentation.
Thanks, Sarah. And then also, I just want to mention that if you download the guide that I put in the link, which is it's a free download, it does have some general guidance on cottage food products and then establishing food processing facilities.
Great, thank you both. Other questions? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was wondering if anyone could speak to any of the environmental concerns that might come up with kelp farming, like I don't know. I don't really know what it would be, but I just think of like monocropping and like issues that could happen with that, and like maybe like sea animals getting stuck in racks. I don't know. just, yeah, if you could speak to that, that would be great.
Yeah, great question. Lindsay or Melissa, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. I can take a step, but I was actually going to say Michelle probably has a great sense of this, being on the regulation.
True. Yeah, all of you.
So I'll let her start, and then I can add if there's anything else.
Hey, there is some concerns, but unfortunately, it's just so new that we don't have a lot. So there's guidelines. There's marine mammal policy guidelines that are available out there for marking of your sites, and then also for disentanglement and how you're supposed to, report things right away. So far, fingers crossed, we haven't had any whale entanglements or things like that in kelp farms yet in Alaska. I think it has happened a couple times in Mexico and whatnot, but so far they're still developing designs out there. So all the new ideas that come up, there's different ways to anchor the gear and attach the gear and whatnot. As far as like monocropping and stuff like that, there's genetic policies in place for plants that can be outplanted on your site. So right now, the current policy, until we have further information, is that plants that are seeded on aquatic farms must be represented by 50 individual parent plants and be within 50 kilometers by water of the collection site to the outplanting site, so that we maintain the local genetic diversity in the area in case all your lines go free and the kelp gets wandered or washed up on shore. It's not going to be a detriment to the local populations because it's using local population, and that it as of right now, all the hatcheries need to have new brood stock each year. So they're constantly revitalizing the genetics that are in the field at that time. We don't have anything as of yet as far as pathology for aquatic plants, but it may come up in the future as well.
Yeah, and I'll say, during the permitting process, you're not going to be able to put in a farm site that's anywhere near migratory pathways, seal haulouts, sea otter populations, sea lions, walrus, or spawning areas. And so there's a pretty extensive review process to try to mitigate any of those occurrences. And as Michelle said, there hasn't been a ton of research that has gone into it, but starting probably this fall, there's a large research consortium that has been put together to look at the impacts of farm operations, both the physiochemical environment, interactions with the biological communities, so seafloor, things passing through, things trying to live in your farms, and then those larger animals as well, the marine mammals and such. And so that's going to be really interesting. And that's a 10-year funded project with industry and in partnership and regulatory agencies, academia. And so that will be super interesting. So we can really better understand what those impacts are, whether positive or negative, right? Because there certainly could be positive impacts as well. And then in addition, for folks that don't know, when it comes to kelp farming, what folks are doing is they're outplanting in the fall, growing through the winter, and then harvesting in the spring. So there's actually nothing growing through the summer months. And each farm is dependent, but most of that gear is coming out of the water as well.
And I'll also add, I think those are really great comments. And I think that there is a wide acceptance in the kelp farming industry that because it is a new industry, farmers are very aware of being very respectful of in terms of gaining social license. So in making sure that their gear is not negatively impacting the environment or other industries, being very conscientious in order to try and build credibility within the industry. So there's a lot of research going into how to keep lines nice and taut to avoid entanglement if that is an issue at all. And there's some technology on lines that will actually break if they have enough stress put on them. So if there were to be a marine mammal entanglement, that the line would snap and benefit the animal. So I would say that overall the industry is like very aware of that if there are any environmental concerns, it could really shut down the growth. And so there's a lot of research going into that.
Yeah, very helpful. Thank you. Yeah, and between organizations like Green Wave and Sea Grant and the investments of the state and others, there really is a lot of attention and focus on the development of this industry, and in a way that feels like people are really trying to be conscious of those possible implications and externalities. Let's see, Drake is asking, how possible is it to volunteer time to a kelp farm? Interested in learning more.
Possible, you know, there's not a lot of kelp farms out there, so the best way would be to start reaching out to farmers.
Drake, you should sign up for the Green Wave community and post your note to the broader community, and maybe you'll find a farmer.
I know a couple of folks who have done it with farms here in Southeast. I mean, there's always help needed. So if you can reach out, there's certainly ways to do that. Fish and Game website lists all the aquatic farms in the state and what their crops are or their permitted species. So you could click around if you're looking at where you live, and you can find places in your local area and see if there's anybody around. But yeah, volunteers are always welcome.
I'll go ahead and ask a question. I think it's just very interesting to have information today in the spectrum from wild harvest to farming of seaweeds. And I know that in some parts of the country and in the world, there's a focus that's shifting from wild harvest to growing seaweeds to ensure that we're not over harvesting or putting too much pressure on wild populations. And I wonder, Michelle, can you speak to that at all, or any one of you speak to that? What that looks like in Alaska and to what degree that's at play here?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I missed the very beginning of your question about what aspects were you looking at for mitigating any overharvesting? Is that what you asked?
Well, I was just, yeah, sorry, I'm afraid my internet connection may be a little unstable. Looking at, talking about wild harvest and the nascent aquaculture industry here in Alaska, and to what degree is concern about wild harvest or overharvest driving some of the move toward farming seaweed?
Oh, sure. So the wild harvest that's gone on, as I shared, there's no limits on places that are subsistence use. It's when you start going commercial that you need a commissioner's permit. And so they do kind of limit you in that sense. And since there's not a lot of information known, they've kind of used that as a way to research. So if somebody harvests from a specific kelp bed in an area, they say, okay, you can only harvest 20% of the kelp bed, and then we'll check it next year and see whether or not that's sustainable for that kelp. Like, did it regrow the next year? If it didn't, then we'll know that's too much, and we'll need to spread out harvest over a broader spectrum or broader area. If it seems to be doing just fine, they may increase that amount or allow the poundage that you can collect in a specific area, or they may shift around areas. So it's like, oh, we've been concentrating on harvest in the proximity of Barlow Bay and Juneau for 3 years. This year we're gonna close the area or not issue the commissioner's permit for that specific area, and it's going to move you to on the other side of Admiralty Island or something like that. So it's really a case-by-case basis, depending on the species and depending on your volume amount for commissioner's permits. As far as turning the drive toward aquatic farms, that's great, because what it does is it makes a much more unified product, for one thing. So it's like someone specifically grows bull kelp or sugar kelp. It's you can get an easier time getting what it is you're looking for, instead of like shifting through the wild stock if you're really looking to make a specific product in mind. If you become a buyer of aquatic farm products, then it certainly helps homogenize, and it also helps give you a much easier location, because generally they're going to be in a bay or some protected area, And then you don't have to go around searching for it and say, did this, is this kelp bed still here year after year? Because they do move. They're not, always in the same spot each time. And so you get a little more consistency. And then you also can plan out stuff as well, assuming that they don't have a major failure on their farm site, you can expect a certain amount to be there. So that gives you a little more stability as well. And then since the farm's stock is all created from wild harvest, then you do know that you're not impacting by like importing from somewhere else. It is local stock, local species, but you're not impacting the actual local environment where those kelp beds could be, great habitat for certain species in other areas. You're going offshore a little bit and harvesting from there without impacting those habitat ecosystems.
Great, thank you. I think we have 1 or 2 more minutes. Eliza, I think you had your hand up. Did you want to, are you still with us? Did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, sorry, I may have missed this, but is there a permit needed for subsistence use? Do you actually need a permit for that in the state?
Not for non-commercial sale.
For non-commercial sale? Okay.
Or I'm sorry, non-commercial use.
Right.
If you're selling, it becomes commercial. So if you're only harvesting for subsistence, you don't need a permit. And then if you're harvesting in the non-subsistence areas, the Juneau, Ketchikan, and South Central, you need a sportfish license, but you don't need a permit for personal use harvest.
Thank you.
Well, we're just about out of time, unless anyone has one last quick question. I will then just say thank you to all of you for coming and joining us. Just super interesting mix of information, and it'll be exciting. I hope we can reconvene in some way at the next conference and see where we are in 18 months, because there's certainly a lot happening.
Thanks, Evie.
Thank you all for being part of it.
Thanks, Evie.
Thanks to all of our panelists today. Thanks for the attendees. We peaked at 51 attendees in this session, so certainly a topic of interest. Wanted to remind everyone, it's currently 11:45. We are on break until 12:15, so if you're continuing on with the conference, please check out our virtual vendor booths, check out our silent auction, and then plenary room A in the agenda is where we'll host our legislative greetings from Representative Young, Governor Dunleavy, and then we have a keynote from Eva Burke called Take Only What You Need. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great rest of the conference or day.